Welcome to the IT Operations in Government webinar with Scale Computing Solutions. Today, our moderator and presenter is going to be Alan Conboy with Scale Computing. He's the Office of the CTO. And with that, I'll go ahead and kick it over to Alan.
Thanks, Dusty. And thanks for coming, guys. I appreciate you taking time out of your incredibly busy day these days to visit with us. If you have questions, like Dusty mentioned, go ahead and make sure you get those into the chat session. We'll make sure to get them answered as fast as we can get to them. Now, with that being said, I'm lucky enough today to be joined by two guys that have been hands-on in the governance space with Scale for their infrastructure for quite some time, and wanted to host a meeting for folks that face many of the same challenges they have, to talk specifically about how infrastructure can be brought under control in a manner that anybody can do at a price point that makes sense for budgets the way they've become. So I'd like to introduce both Chris Israel, he's the IT director for Madison County, Kentucky, and Brent Ruggles, he's the IT manager for Grafton County, New Hampshire. With that being said, I'd like to go ahead and dive specifically into Chris's background and what brought him to looking at Scale. Hi, Chris. How are you?
Good morning, everybody. Doing well.
So do me a favor. Talk a little bit, if you will, about the challenges that you face unique to the county there, and some of the things that led you to looking at new infrastructure, getting away from the old school, so to speak.
Yeah, getting away from the old school, that's a good way to summarize it. Madison County is unique. I don't know if many people know this, a few people do, but Madison County, Kentucky is actually a host to a chemical stockpile, has about 523 tons of nerve agent, GB, VX, and mustard that's stored on an Army depot inside of Madison County. There's only two remaining Army stockpiles in the nation, and one of those is here in Madison County, Kentucky, and the other is in Pueblo, Colorado. So we are fortunate enough to have lots of federal funding that gives us lots of money to afford the nicest things in technology, and it, really gives a lot of good infrastructure. The problem with that is that we are nearing the end of that program. Within probably 2 to 5 years, all of those chemicals will be destroyed, and that money will dry up. We won't be receiving those funds anymore. So we like to call it, we've been buying the Cadillac, we can't really afford it in the future. So kind of the mission from our administrative people was to find out now when we're upgrading infrastructure to buy things that we can afford once this program ends. So that's what I was challenged with. And the infrastructure that was old was all heavy VMware. We have nimble storage units and lots of VMware hosts. Those hosts were anywhere from 12 to 15 years old. We were landlocked on the VMware product scale. We couldn't move past version 6 of vCenter. We are, like many of you, probably bound by the CJIS regulations for 911 centers and the sheriff departments and law enforcement. And now they're requiring you to be on the latest software and the latest revisions of hardware in order to be compliant. So we were facing an issue of we had to buy infrastructure that we could afford in the future, even though we pretty much had an unlimited pot to start with at this point. But we got to be able to afford this in 3 years when it goes away. And we wanted to find something that was easy to maintain. One of the other panelists, Brent Ruggles, talked just Tuesday about how he kind of found Scale. I didn't find Scale. Scale kind of found me. It just came up in a conversation about, hey, have you ever heard of Scale Computing? Have you ever heard of a different infrastructure other than VMware? And honestly, no, I hadn't. VMware was the one we'd always used, and the one that everybody talks about. It's the giant, so to speak, right? So we're faced with multiple vendors. We had the Nimble, we had VMware, we had contractors, and they all do the famous thing of what? Pointing the finger at each other when things don't work, right? Our infrastructure was expensive to maintain. We were having to buy parts off of eBay, and when we wanted to do memory upgrades or when things failed, it was complicated. As all of you probably know, trying to set up all of those different networking paths and all that kind of stuff between your storage and your local SANs, it was complicated. And a lot of times you could never find what the real issue was. And again, it was aging. It was 10 to 15 years old, which is unheard of. But we really thought like the hardware was giving us a good life, but we just can't meet the current compliance regulations to keep that hardware. So where we were kind of looking for stuff, we weren't. The current plan was just to buy new hardware and keep on moving with VMware. I just happened to go to a little luncheon with a vendor who mentioned it, and here we are. And I can't say that we're probably happier than we've ever been. Scale's been an awesome product for us. Just a little bit about what we do. There's about 700 users in 26 different facilities across the county that account for about 23 departments or agencies. And again, those are like 911 systems, the sheriff's departments, the emergency operations center, plus the chemical stockpile part of that we talked about earlier, and all of the county administrative offices. We really wanted something that was highly available. The system we were operating in VMware was kind of highly available, but as you know, if you've done your research, it's very expensive to make it highly available and redundant. We wanted something that was scalable, easy to use, and affordable. So kind of what we did is we worked with Frank and the team there at Scale, and they just did an assessment of our infrastructure and found out, what kind of horsepower we needed and what that looked like. And as we showed up there, we ended up with a 4-node cluster. It's actually production. It was ordered, shipped, we racked it up and installed it in a matter of like an hour. It was really easy to do, and they provided tools for us to be able to convert from VMware to Scale. The other awesome part of it was we were able to, with the same funds, purchase another 4-node cluster that gave us disaster recovery. We'd always had backups, and I was very nervous with the backups. It was a Veeam backup infrastructure. I wasn't sure if it would ever work when we really needed it the most. But I tell you what, this Scale product, we've set it up, the other disaster recovery cluster down about 25 miles from our primary location. It's connected via a microwave ring. And about every hour, we're taking a snapshot and replicating that stuff all the way 25 miles. I can sleep at night and be happy. And as Brent will talk about too, we did it all at a fair price point. It was easy to afford, easy to set up, and easy to maintain.
So, Chris, how long have you guys been up running in production on HC3 now?
Since October of 2019 is when the first set of nodes went in. So just a little over like 7 months now.
Okay. And from a costing perspective, compared to what you were looking to have to do, how did Scale rank up there?
Oh, yeah. If we were going to repurchase the VMware licensing and get the same DR recovery, I wouldn't say half, but, several $100,000 in savings by not choosing a VMware platform.
Now, here at Scale, one of the things we like to refer to ourselves as is autonomous hyperconverged infrastructure. One of our claims to fame historically has been, all the way back since 2011 when we coined the term hyperconvergence in the first place, is the ability to be friendly to everybody, not just VCPs and CCNEs and SNIA certified storage engineers. Has that been your experience administering HC3 compared to dealing with your legacy VMware-based infrastructure?
Absolutely. And we were fortunate enough to be, Veeam certified and VMware certified, and we went to all the Nimble classes and had all the instruction. But with this Scale product, it's like plug and play. It was really, it's kind of hard to fathom in the IT world that something that is good is easy to do. I think I probably struggled with that a little bit. This is almost too easy. It can't be that good, but it is. It's really plug it in, set it, and forget it. I hope that doesn't sound too marketing, but that really is the truth.
Well, that's what we were shooting for, and not from a marketing perspective. So I'm glad to hear it. So I'd like to go ahead and introduce Brent as well, so that we can get his take on what it's been like for the county to have moved to HC3. Now, Brent, as I recall, you moved to HC3 quite a while back.
Yeah, I was an early adopter, and I'm not looking back at all. We got going with the product, I believe it was in 2015. We brought in 2 of the HC3 node systems. We've just recently received a 3rd one. we were running on a product that began with V, and we ended up kind of in a hostage situation where we were using the vSphere Essentials Plus product. There was no easy migratory path to get on to the next release. We were getting vSAN shoved down our throat. So I had to get basically going on research on where we were going to go. Hyperconverged was fairly new at that point in time, and I did a lot of research for a couple months, and the name Scale kept coming up. The VMware product was extremely complicated. Updates were always nightmarish. While they would fix some things, we'd have other things, new problems arise. We received our first clusters, and we got our first cluster racked and stacked. And again, our VMware product took weeks to get going. We turned up our first cluster similar to Chris, and it was under an hour. Rack stacked, and I think from turning it on, loading the actual program to boot up the cluster under 15 minutes, and I pretty much fell out of my chair. Product's been fantastic to work with. We're currently using 2 of our 3-node clusters for live production, and they basically replicate snapshots back and forth. One of those is getting older now. We brought in a new one, and we're going to, similar to what Chris was doing, use one as a backup, just to store basically replicated snapshots from other systems. We're on like a small college campus with a fiber ring. So we basically have these in independent silos located in separate buildings for disaster recovery. And the product has been fantastic. The price point was fantastic. It was definitely, back then, it was a little under half of what we would have had to go with to get equivalent equipment from another vendor. I was really excited about the company, their ability to use something that's open source, KVM, and hybridize it, use existing technology as part of their solution out there. I coined a phrase, it's like Bronco K-Tel. You literally do set it and forget it. Extremely easy to manage. Updates have been flawless. Tech support is probably the best. I've been in IT for 28 years now. One of the best experiences I've ever had working with the team. These people are truly an extension of your team. You get to know them on a personal level. There's nobody that is inapproachable. I've talked to many of the upper echelon as well as support. We don't use them because you really don't need to, but a few times I have, it's just been carte blanche. They do an excellent job all around. We're really excited with the choice that I made. It's extremely simple to manage, and yeah, there's no turning back, no looking back. These guys are really the hidden gem that's out there in the ocean of many other vendors, and right here in the United States too, everybody. Some real innovators, leaders in the field, and I researched G2, Gartner, all kinds of places. And it's worked out extremely well for us.
I'm glad to hear that, Brent. I really am. And that's obvious, evidenced by the fact that you've come back to update to even a newer node family, add yet a newer node family. Now, I noticed that you're also using it for a lot of the same use cases that Chris is here. 911 systems and sheriff's department, nursing homes, et cetera. Can you kind of expand on how you're using your cluster a little bit?
Yeah, well, we're actually using it. We've got 10 remote police department agencies that are actually coming in remotely to access basically the database for criminal records and such in the area, in the county. We've got nursing home systems on it, attorney systems, nursing home, the whole gamut. So we need something that's CJIS compliant, HIPAA compliant, fault tolerant, which this solution, the way we've set it up, gives you that. And it's just been fantastic. I hired a new person in our IT department not too long ago. It allows us to do more with less, and training. It's just easy peasy. I can't say enough about it. We love the system. We love the people. They're a great team to work with.
Well, we're glad to have you part of the family here at Scale, Brent. Chris, I'd like to flip back to you real quick, if you don't mind. I noticed something interesting here. You have an extra cluster. And I believe when we were speaking the other day, you mentioned a very interesting use case for that I thought some of the folks attending this might find interesting.
Yeah, so we did actually purchase a whole nother separate cluster that's 3 nodes of scale. What we're doing with that is we were approached by one of the other counties in Kentucky. He was a newly elected official. He didn't have any high IT staff. He was still using green screens for his financial software. He just came and met with us to kind of talk about some of the things that we were doing, the software we were using, because he just didn't have any guidance. Oddly enough, he was the one that approached us and said, hey, I don't want to hire people, and I really don't want to invest in an infrastructure, but I got a lot of money, oddly enough. Would you ever be interested in hosting data for us? And where we have all this federal money that's coming in, we have a fairly nice data center for a central Kentucky county. It can withstand 250-mile-an-hour winds, and it's got diesel generators and backup air conditioners, you name it, and water. It's got everything you would ever want. So we were like, I never really thought about it, and it was the exact time we were actually purchasing our production nodes. So we did sign an agreement with them. We have a separate 3-node cluster that is in our data center that is hosting servers for another county government. And we're doing that completely through the Scale node, and then we're taking that node and replicating to our DR node that's in another location as well.
Outstanding. Outstanding. I just found that use case to be very interesting, almost MSP-like, but in the governance space. And I wanted to share that message with folks. Really kind of demonstrates the flexibility of the platform.
Yeah, and the great thing about that is that it, we paid X for the product, put it in with just our time, a little bit of time to put it in and set it up. We're going to turn a profit in year 1.
That's outstanding. That's absolutely outstanding, especially in days of challenging budgets like we're having today with everything going on in the world. So let me do this. I'd like to talk a little bit to folks about what Scale's HC3 platform is. Essentially, many, many years ago, the other founders and myself set out to solve a problem that everybody seemed to have and nobody seemed to question. Why was virtualization so complex, so expensive? Why did it have so many moving parts from so many different vendors? And we discovered all those years ago, back, about 2008, that's because virtualization had never been purpose-built. It was an amalgamation, if you will, of different parts and different technologies from different technology domains, kind of shoehorned in together. So we decided to sit down here at Scale and create from whole cloth, from a clean sheet of paper, how highly available virtualization should have been done in the first place. Not necessarily focusing on the needs of the hallowed halls of the Fortune 50, but rather focusing on the needs of every man, the folks that could use virtualization the most. What we designed, writing every single layer ourselves, the storage stack, the cluster orchestration stuff, the management stack, the DR stack, the hypervisor integration stuff, everything, came to be known as HC3. The term hyperconvergence, or HCI, was actually coined by an analyst in Boston, now retired, Arun Tanaja, specifically to describe what we had created. Autonomous hyperconverged infrastructure, one that self-heals, self-load balances, self-manages, and frees you up to focus on things that are less mundane, less focused on figuring out what cable got kicked out, what power supply went up in smoke, while keeping everything running, but doing it at a price point that makes sense. Now, we've been in this industry for over a decade now. You'll find this all over state, local, federal governments, both here in the States and globally. Here's just a few examples of some of the folks that are running HC3 for their core infrastructure and for other functions as well. Now, there's certain advantages that come with running your infrastructure on HC3. You don't need to be a VCP. You don't need to be a CCNE. You don't need to be a SNIA certified storage engineer. Often I joke about the fact that, well, you can literally take a kid straight out of the local community college, still waving around his A+ cert like he's the first human to ever get one, and be able to have that guy sit down, stand up an HC3 cluster, create virtual machines, set up DR, do failovers, failbacks, etc. Funny thing is, that's not hyperbole. That's the truth. It really is that easy. You see, when you design an entire infrastructure from the ground up and build every layer specifically to work directly with every other layer, those are the kinds of things that you can do. You can get rid of storage protocols entirely. We did. You can get rid of concepts like LUNs, etc. We don't need CVMs, we don't use them. We don't need VSAs, we don't use them. We use storage as it should have been used all along. You'll find that kind of mentality throughout an HC3 implementation. Now, here's just some of the high-level bullet points. I'm not going to sit here and read them to you. You guys can read just as well as I can. Pardon me. Of what HC3 does for you. I'm going to walk you quickly through a little timeline on the background of the company. Launched the company formally back in 2008, looking to answer that specific question. Why was highly available virtualization so complex and expensive? By 2011, we had our answers and had our base platform. Launching it in 2012. Oddly enough, for a platform that uses zero VMware code of any kind at any level, we chose to launch it at VMware's flagship show, VMworld. I highly recommend that if you ever have the opportunity in your IT career to do that, go for it. It's a lot of fun. You won't be invited back, but it's an awful lot of fun to do. Now, over the years between then and now, you can see where each of those large landmarks have validated our approach. And as we've grown, we've discovered that we can fit from the smallest of the small to the largest of the large. Now I'm going to jump forward here and start talking about specific things you can do with HC3. We'll start with the basics. Server workloads across the board. Traditional virtualization. You can run your entire infrastructure on an HC3 platform at half the cost of doing it with the legacy approaches. Leveraging the same hypervisor that powers things like Google's cloud, AWS cloud. One of the largest used hypervisors on the planet based on KVM. Now, expanding beyond just the basics of server virtualization. VDI. VDI done differently though. Done in a way that doesn't require an entire cast of supporting servers and enough licensing to sync a battleship. Half the cost of a Horizon implementation or a Citrix implementation. That stands itself up in less than an hour. It's not hard to do at all. Tons of folks from hospitals to cities and counties have already replaced their legacy VDI implementations with something that's much more cost-effective, doesn't give up on feature functionality, but frees admins up to do things that make a difference for the county. Now, extending that thought process further, and this is something you may have heard of us doing over the last 3 or 4 weeks. That same plumbing that enables VDI, the connection brokers, the gateways, etc. allow us to connect folks to any kind of desktop existing in the environment, physical or virtual. We were able to, in a matter of a day or less, get folks up and working from home once they found themselves stuck at the house and no longer able to get back to their desktops. Just inherent in our platform and approach. Moving on from there, one of the things you heard both Brent and Chris talk about is DR. Well, we built DR directly into the platform itself. Any HC3 cluster can replicate on a bidirectionally tracked with failover and failback to any HC3 target to which it has a route. Single nodes, remote entire clusters, HC3 Cloud Unity running on the Google Compute Engine. Agentless, inherent in the platform, nothing to buy. It's just part of what you get. You see, one of the things that we wanted to solve for with HC3 was getting rid of that entire notion that, oh, you needed to pay for this feature, you needed to pay for that function, oh, you wanted this, well, that's another license. No. With HC3, we wanted all features, all functionalities to be simply included in the platform, all done at the cost of the nodes themselves. And the nodes are roughly equivalent to the cost of decent servers, bringing budgets back in line and making it an order of magnitude easier to stand up, administer, and live with. Okay? All of your table stakes from a storage perspective, they're there. Dedupe, replication, you name it. But due to Scale's unique architecture and the way that we chose to implement things like state machines, getting rid entirely of external management servers. There's no equivalent to a vCenter server or a System Center virtual machine manager here. We don't need one. The nodes talk directly to themselves. Well, those same state machines, they manage all of the ancillary functions like deduplication, monitoring, hardware monitoring, automated recovery from problems, identification of problems. That's what the guys meant when they said it's very much set and forget. You don't need to think about it. Now, going beyond just DR. DR we build in, but we've also built out our ecosystem of other vendors out in the space that want to work with HC3 as well. Part of that is for even more advanced backup and native ransomware protection, active ransomware protection. Our partnership with Acronis brings those to the table, the ability to send that backup data in addition to as many targets as you want internally, in addition to the native DR replication and snapshot mechanisms, being able to send them to your cloud of choice. Now, anybody that's curious and really wants to see that ransomware protection in action, bust open a browser and Google a simple term, Acronis and WannaCry. Go to videos, and there's a video there that I think you'll find stunning. Natively, without human intervention required, automatically detecting ransomware payloads when they try to employ, stopping them, killing their threads, rolling the data back to its unencrypted state without a human having to get involved. That's part of what expanding our ecosystem does for our customer base. Now, in addition, I want to talk briefly about Cloud Unity. If you noticed in that timeline, early on, the good folks over at Google took notice of Scale, took notice of what we were doing. You see, in the Google Compute Engine, the Google Cloud, they use an almost identical architecture to what Scale is implemented internally with HC3. And that struck up the obvious conversation of, hey, let's make it so that you can replicate your VMs, et cetera, directly into an instance running on GCP. But let's take it further than just simple DR, a tape drive in the sky. Let's make those Google instances participate in your local network We were the first to implement layer 2 VXLAN overlay so that those scale nodes in the cloud participated in your local network. Still do. Doesn't have to be inflated from a CPU and RAM perspective until you need to fail over to it. And that translates to significant savings while still giving you that real-time failover capability set. Just easy to go. Now, when I said we could run from the smallest of the small to all the way up to the cloud, I wasn't kidding. Edge to fog to core to cloud, we have platforms that, without changing, reducing feature set, without modifying our stacks in any way, can run on platforms as small as the Intel NUC and as large as Google. Exact same interface, exact same stack, no matter where the use case or what size the use case. One thing to know, easy to learn, easy to manage. Our goal has always been be able to take your average Windows administrator and have him up to speed to where he can set up a cluster, carve off virtual machines, do those live migrations, set up DR, set up failovers and failbacks, and do it in 15 minutes or so. Less than an hour, certainly. That's what scale computing, that's what HC3 is all about. Now, earlier you heard Brent refer to scale as kind of the hidden gem. Well, that's what we've set out to do. We didn't want to go out and spend a ton of other people's marketing dollars. We wanted to immediately get to work, starting all those years ago, with making a difference for people that needed it the most. Here we are. Now, I want to finish up here by talking about support. Chris and Brent mentioned their support experience. You see, here at Scale, we decided early on that it didn't make sense to follow the herd. We wanted to get rid of the entire concept associated with, lead, copper, silver, gold, and platinum support contracts. Give everyone 24/7, 365 support. We also didn't want to hire script readers and, help desk folks, but rather hire tier 2 or better actual engineers that know the platform inside and out and make them immediately reachable. Our average time delta between when somebody calls support and when they're connected to a real engineer that knows exactly what they're doing is less than 90 seconds. That's led us to having one of the highest NPS scores in the industry, well into the mid-90s and sustained there for over a decade. Now, support directly accessible 24/7, 365 for the entire stack, no matter where a problem happens to be. But because we built the platform the way we did, self-healing, self-load balancing with those state machines acting essentially as a sysadmin in the box, that means that we are able to help support an entire issue start to finish, no matter where the fault lies. We've done that for years. Well, we've expanded that support use case beyond just the basics of technical support, offering remote services, integration, planning services, the entire suite that you'd expect, but doing it in a way that you just don't expect. Easy, friendly, and approachable. Folks, that's scale computing. That's why you find us all over state and local governance. That's why you find us in schools. That's why you find us everywhere that folks really need the high availability and simplicity that virtualization can bring. But we bring it with a peace of mind and at a price point pretty much nobody else can. With that being said, I'd like to thank both Brent and Chris for joining us, and I'd simultaneously like to throw the floor open to questions.
Yes, excellent. Thank you, Alan. Thanks, Brent. Thanks, Chris. There are a few questions that have come in, so I'll open it up to the panel. One is, I'm currently running VMware. How do I migrate my current VMs to the Scale platform? And I think Brent, or maybe it was Chris, mentioned that, and even Alan, you can cover that as well.
Sure. So, like anything in this industry, there's half a dozen ways to skin that cat. But we wanted to do something better and different for folks needing to do P2Vs and V2Vs. You know, historically, guys had to burn a weekend per system, wanting to move from one platform to another, from physical servers to virtual servers. We knew we could do better. So we partnered all the way back in 2010 with a company to create something called HC3 Move. Now, of course, we have the ability to simply import your VMDKs. That's not hard. Do the same thing with VHDs and QCOW2s, depending on what platform you're coming from, okay? But we wanted to be able to do it without the outage windows. We wanted to give sysadmins their weekends back. So in creating HC3 Move, we created a platform that has an agent-based approach. You know, for example, you might have an old 2K8R2 VM running on vSphere that's maybe running SQL, running, doing transactions live. Maybe it's an OLTP web-facing database. Who knows? Well, with HC3 Move, you can simply toss an agent into that ESX VM. It's non-invasive. It doesn't require a reboot. It inserts itself at the network stack, the kernel, and the application layer. Okay. Simultaneously, over on HC3, on your shiny new HC3 cluster, carve yourself off a new VM. Maybe toss a base copy of 2K8R2 onto that, but don't bother with application adding or domain joining or any of that, and toss the agent on it as well. Now, bear in mind that SQL instance, it stays up running, doing transactions the entire time. You bring up the move interface, select the source machine, the destination machine, and hit go. Now, while that SQL instance is up, running, doing column and row inserts, doing live transactions, it starts mirroring all of its directory structures, all of its registry entries, and all new I/O as it happens across the wire into the same locations on that target HC3 VM, silvering up the mirror. Once that process completes, might be an hour, might be a day, doesn't matter because you're up and running the entire time. But once it completes, Move comes back to you and says, hey, I'm ready to fail over. At your convenience, you hit the fail it over button. It does a graceful shutdown on that ESX VM without changing it in any way. Simultaneously reboots that HC3 VM and Windows Update style rolls in those changes, rolls in the registry changes, etc. Comes up as that same SQL VM, that same 2K8R2 instance, only now running on HC3. Total outage window is just the length of time of that reboot. Gives you the weekend back. Gets rid of the outage window. It's that mentality that we bring to everything in the HC3 world. Make it simple. Make very complex things simple to do. I hope that answers your question on any of many ways that you can move virtual machines from whatever the legacy infrastructure is to HC3. Dusty, do we have another question?
Yep, absolutely. I appreciate that. Thanks, Alan. The next one, would Scale require me to continue using Veeam or something similar for backups?
Require? No. You can, if you really, really want to. Any of the Veeam-based, in-guest-based, agent-based approaches work fine. They don't know anything's changed. Whether it's Veeam or Unitrends or Commvault or backup player of choice, any of those in-guest-based approaches continue to work. Okay? However, what you find with HC3 is we've done the thing that needed to be done all along. We've bifurcated concepts that used to get lumped in together, DR and backup, and done it in such a way that The entire DR piece, snapshotting, replicating from site to site, etc., is simply inherent in the platform. Taking snapshots, the act of taking a snapshot, doesn't consume any additional space. We have low-level control over the individual blocks themselves, and it's simply a pointer that we need to insert. So we do. Okay. We actively support 5,986 snapshots or so. Round it off, call it $6,000 per virtual hard drive per VM. When you've got that kind of flexibility, there's a whole lot you can do. Now, on top of that inherent built-in DR with replication, failover, and failback, that's where we bring in our partners like Acronis to handle the more advanced and deeper integrations with specific applications, to bring things like ransomware protection and modern threats, more than just, guy that backhoes the wrong thing or bad weather. Okay? And allows even greater flexibility of using up some Azure credits that you might have got when you went to Office 365, et cetera.
Excellent. All right, and I got one final one here. They're asking, can any of the appliances be treated as a primary cluster? So, for example, can 3 edge appliances be used at primary data center for smaller customers?
Of course you can. And then replicate those back to larger data centers, larger clusters at a core location. That's not that terribly different from what Chris is doing in hosting some of his environmental stuff for some of his area counties. Several of our other state and local government customers do things like act as replication targets, failover and failback targets for each other, where 2 adjacent counties might replicate their data to each other for simple failover and failback.
So that's where our conversation started, Alan, was they wanted us to really just be a backup node for them. But as the communication kind of happened, they just didn't have any internal infrastructure to handle it. So that's why we're hosting their actual servers in our data center. But you're right. There's a lot of talk between one of the cities in our county to do the same thing, to just back up their data to us. There seems to be a lot of questions about whether they need Veeam or not. We let our Veeam licenses lapse, and we do not use Veeam anymore. We rely solely on the replication between the 2 clusters. And we are looking into the Acronis product to do a 3rd site backup that would be more of a file level backup to one of our radio tower sites that has storage space available.
That raises a good point, Chris. One of the other functions of backup, as it differentiates from DR, backup by definition means getting your data off platform, right? That's part of why, in addition to the ransomware protection piece that just comes with it and cloud access piece, is the ability to back up your data completely off of HC3. That's just good practice no matter what the platform is and who the admin is. Always keep a copy of your data completely off platform. Have a copy sitting in the cloud, copy on that NAS over there, copy on a SAN across town. That's where that backup differentiation comes into play.
All right, excellent. We'll take one last question, and Alan, I think you're the perfect person to answer this. So if you have an existing scale cluster for server virtualization but are interested in the VDI and Leo stream, is the recommendation to set up a separate 3-node cluster to start the VDI, or can we start with what we have?
It depends on what you have, what it is, what you're using it for, what the load is, and what available resources are. For some guys that just have a handful, maybe 20, 25 VDI VMs, of course, they've got plenty of overhead and room on maybe a hybrid cluster, something that's got a flash tier and some spinning disk. But if somebody, on the other hand, has maybe an older all-spinning disk cluster that is heavily, heavily loaded, it might not be the best user experience to try and co-locate those. Now, conversely, if you're looking at a full-blown VDI implementation, a few hundred to maybe 1,000 seats, honestly, I vastly personally prefer, just taking my scale hat off for a minute, to keep those desktop loads separate from my server loads. Reason being, once you get above just a handful, the I/O patterns and CPU utilization patterns between the server infrastructure stuff and desktop usage often become at odds with each other. Nobody's going to complain if the desktop's slow to respond on a server, on a file server, but everybody's going to complain if, their mouse isn't moving the way it should.
Excellent. All right. Well, I want to thank Alan from Scale Computing for joining us today, and definitely Brent and Chris for taking the time out of your busy schedules and joining us. It's always good to have customers who are in the wild, in the industry, using this product and being able to come on and talk about that. So we do appreciate everyone who joined as well. We will do some follow-up. This was recorded, and we can also share the slides. So with that, I will go ahead and conclude today's call, and everyone stay safe and enjoy the rest of your week. Thanks all.